Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Today we're covering the latest Australian economic news, and self-driving cars are one step closer. And we're answering your questions on HECS debt, tracking your portfolio, and changing asset allocation through different life stages. Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what's possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the very first time, a huge welcome to our community. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. And how could we not be excited? There's so much happening in markets. But one thing I want to bring your attention to, in case you weren't aware, there's a lot of negative news in the world. And if we zoom in on America, there's political unrest, there's protests on the streets, and there's
Trump swearing.
Trump swearing, yeah. I mean, Trump swearing arguably brought about a ceasefire.
It did,
arguably.
Yeah. Arguably, yeah.
And yeah, you know, there's the prospects of another drawn-out Middle East quagmire. So you wouldn't guess it, but the stock market is, depending on what index you're looking at, is either hitting or about to hit all-time highs.
It's crazy, isn't it? Blink and you would have missed it.
The market's up more than 20% since its Liberation Day lows. It's up for the year, the US market, S&P 500. It's up about 4% for the year. And for us, it is a reminder of why you need to stay invested. Because there were so many factors that could have said, now's the time to sell and time to get out. But the market is an unpredictable beast in the short term, and it's often a losing game trying to time the market. That's why we stay invested. That's why we dollar cost average. And that's why we're confident over the long term that will be a winning strategy.
Yeah. If you'd sold in Liberation, the ASX has rallied 16% since.
Yeah.
Pretty
stay
crazy.
Invested.
Stay
that's
invested.
What we're saying. And when the market dips, buy more.
Absolutely.
There's never been a dip in history that wasn't worth buying.
Nice.
News and markets.
Today we're going to cover some Australian macroeconomic news, otherwise known as Australian housing. Robo-taxis continue their rollout, and DroneShield has had a good day. Ren, let's start with all things Australian macro housing.
yeah. I've got a bit of a rant, but let's hit the news and then give me a minute. So the news is Australia's inflation continues to come down. So the Reserve Bank's target is 2 to 3%. And, you know, for years coming out of COVID, we were above that. I think it peaked, at like 7%? We are now well and truly back within target. So for a while, we were sitting at 2.4% for the CPI, which is the headline inflation number. The numbers came out for May. In the 12 months to May, we actually dropped again. We're now at 2.1%. Now, the RBA has a different measure of inflation that they prefer, the trimmed mean inflation, which looks at underlying inflation, takes away like some short-term government policies and the like that might skew the numbers. Underlying inflation, 2.4%, down from 2.8%.
Not bad.
I mean, very good.
Yeah.
There is an argument that we're actually going to start to fall out the other side of the target.
I mean, the expectation now on 3 more rate cuts by the end of the year, I think, would be put into question. Yeah.
So, look, good news for people who have been struggling with the cost of living. Unfortunately, the way we talk about inflation, I think, is a little bit wrong because we talk about it in isolation, 2.1% down from 2.4%, but inflation is a cumulative effect.
Prices are still rising.
They're just rising less, but they don't go backwards.
There's never
but look, it is good news after a couple of really tough years. But here's a little rant that I want to give, if you'll indulge me. The way the Australian media talks about inflation is cooked. Okay. We just don't talk about it in the sense of cost of living or anything, except if it's negative. Then we'll have the cost of living articles, grocery store prices. But the way we talk about it is we refract everything through property.
Yes.
We are a nation obsessed with property. That's not new news. But as the inflation news broke, I just had a look at Australian inflation, and all I Googled here was Australian inflation and then clicked on the news tab. I didn't put anything about housing. Here were the headlines.
Yeah.
News.com.au, major boost for Aussie mortgage holders. That was then reprinted in the Northern Territory News, major boost for Aussie mortgage holders. The Australian, boost for mortgage holders as inflation rate dips. Sydney Morning Herald, inflation dips give Reserve Bank scope for multiple rate cuts.
No.
And then finally, The Guardian, falling inflation rate boost chances of RBA interest rate cut and relief for mortgage holders. It's like, just stop refracting everything through property.
Yeah.
Like, it honestly wouldn't surprise me if we had an article, Israel attacks Iran. What property would the Iranian Supreme Leader buy in Sydney?
I know.
Australia wins Olympic gold. Or, Gout breaks his 200-meter world record.
How good's Gout?
What property does he own in Sydney? You know? It's like, stop refracting everything through property. Okay,
well, with that said, here's some more property news. The Queensland government will introduce a shared equity scheme that will allow first home buyers in the state to get into the market with a 2% deposit. The government will also abolish stamp duty for first home buyers if they're buying new builds. So 2 pretty hefty changes there handed down during their latest state budget. Only going to add fuel to the fire.
And if that wasn't enough, we can't even keep track of how many housing policies the Queensland government introduced in this budget. They are also extending the $30,000 first home buyers grant.
Extending it to just in terms of length?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
If all of them come together, you could be getting 30,000 first home buyer with a 2% deposit and no stamp duty if you're buying new.
Yeah.
That's assuming they can all go together. But
well,
still,
they could. There's no reason they couldn't. Yeah. 2% shared equity scheme, 2% deposits within this shared equity scheme. My question is, which state government will be the first to introduce 0% deposits?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of like why, yeah, and then you've got the state, federal government doing 5%.
5%. Yeah. But
0% would be, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, it'd be crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, look, our question when it comes to this is why do housing affordability policies always increase people's buying power rather than actually make housing more affordable? And there's a simple answer. Like, the quickest way to lose an election would to have house prices fall 10 to 20% on your watch. But that would actually make housing more affordable.
It would. All right, let's keep moving.
That's enough about housing.
Yeah, let's keep moving. It's been a big week for robo-taxis. We announced in our last episode that Tesla had launched their first robo-taxi service in Austin, Texas. It was accompanied by a driver in the passenger seat, but nonetheless, you could get in a taxi and have it drive itself. Waymo and Uber have announced the next city for their combined robo-taxi service, which is Atlanta, Georgia. This is Waymo's 7th city, where the company is already handling 250,000 robo-taxi rides each week.
So this story makes me think of the quote when it comes to technology, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Yep. Very true.
This is a classic example of that, self-driving cars aren't theoretical. They are here. Waymo is doing 250,000 paid rides each week. It's just not evenly distributed.
No.
Yeah.
That's why I want to have my rant and stop talking about it until it's evenly distributed, or until it's like...
It comes to Australia.
It's just like now they're on a rollout plan.
Yes.
Robotaxis are here. They're on a rollout plan. They're going to keep getting bigger and bigger, and there's competition between Tesla and Waymo.
So to pull the curtain back on the Equity Mates production process, this was a conversation this morning where I think it's still interesting news. Bryce doesn't think robotaxis are interesting anymore.
I mean, it's great, but it's like, are we going to do it every new city?
That's a fair question. So we won't do every new city, but I think it is important to suggest that
major announcements.
It's like, for a long time, all of the technological improvements in our lives were new software. Really from like the start of the iPhone era.
This is software.
No. Well, I mean, self-driving cars are hardware.
Sort of.
They're a combination of the both. But it's like our physical world didn't really change with technology over the last 15 years. It was a lot of incredible developments on your phone. But we're starting to see like incredible developments in physical technology,
Don't get me wrong,
reusable rockets, self-driving cars.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it when they...
Like, the world is changing in a really exciting way. Neuralink, less exciting, kind of scary, but again, like, physical hardware is changing the world.
Yes.
again. That's cool.
It is. We don't need to talk about it every single time they go to a new city.
All right,
Let's keep going.
hold on. This will get you excited. Self-driving cars are here. What does that mean for Australian property?
Good question. We're going to close out today with someone who's had a good day, brought to you by Good Day Multivitamin, the once-a-day multivitamin sachet that you can mix with water. It is quick, it is easy, and you can get it done.
Over 60 health benefits in one hit: energy, mental clarity, liver support, even a bit of anxiety relief. It's for everyone, but in particular for people who aren't doing anything. This is the bare minimum you can do.
And Ren, you're raving about it.
Yeah, I am.
You are raving. So let's pull back some curtains even further. Last week we started taking the multivitamin here, thanks to the guys at Good Day, and you came in the next day absolutely frothing the change in how you were feeling.
Look, it's been pretty good. Look, I'm a sucker for things that will that purport to improve your performance. You know. I've actually really enjoyed taking this. Played in a Tuesday night tennis comp, smoked my opponent. I'm going to say 50% me, 50% the multivitamin.
Nice.
But I have like heaps more energy. I'm normally a coffee after lunch, otherwise I really crash kind of guy.
Yep.
Whereas I've felt like heaps more energy. So yeah, look, it's been good. Who knows if it's not a randomized controlled trial. It's just one person's anecdotal feedback, but I'm really enjoying it. Anyway, Let's get on to who's had a good day aside from me and not my opponent in that tennis comp.
That's it. Well, DroneShield has had an awesome day. They announced a $61.6 million deal with the European Union for handheld drone detection and counter-drone systems. On the news, their stock price jumped 60%.
No, 20%.
Sorry, 20%. 20%.
Honestly, you need to have your good day.
I need my good day. I was just thinking to myself, the stock is up about 160%.
No, I think you were also
180%.
you had just read that the deal was a $60 million deal.
Whatever.
Yeah. God. So to put that $61.6 million deal in context, DroneShield's revenue for all of last year, $57.5 million.
So in one deal, they've got the entire annual revenue plus some.
Yeah, this is obviously their biggest single deal in history. It's larger than all of their previous year's revenue combined. So it is just a sign that, again, DroneShield is becoming a bigger and bigger player in the defense space. And it's not surprising that, you know, drones are the next generation of warfare. We all know that. DroneShield and their counter-drone technology seems to be quite in demand. We're obviously not technical experts to say like their technology is better than anyone else's, but the market is kind of speaking before our eyes. And, you know, like the Ukrainian drone attack was this incredible effort to like smuggle all these drones into Russia. But then the Israel attack on Iran to take out all their missile defense systems, again, was drone-led. So it's not surprising that these orders are coming in thick and fast when like the most visible conflicts of our time, drones are playing a more and more central role. Yeah. So look, not a buy, hold or sell recommendation, obviously, but an Australian company that is going to become more and more central to, I guess, warfare.
Up 185% year to date. So if you want to feel as good as Ren does after taking the Good Day multivitamin, you can head to begoodhealth.com.au. We'll put a link in the show notes. Use Equity Mates for 10% off, or you can lock in a subscription for 20% off. Good Day, your health simplified. We love getting questions from the Equity Mates community, and in today's listener mailbag, we're answering questions around HECS debt, around tracking your portfolio, and how to change asset allocation through different life stages. So, Ren, let's get stuck into it.
All right, well, this first question comes in from Dustin.
Good day, Bryce and Ren. Big fan here. I've listened to every single one of your episodes. Love all the content and banter, so thank you. My question today is around lifestyle. I was wondering, what would be your advice for someone who's struggling to find that balance between investing for the future whilst enjoying the present? So for context, I'm 33 years old. I have no children. I have an investment property. I'm currently in the market for another. I have a reasonable share portfolio and I have no debt other than my mortgage. We all know to avoid lifestyle creep and to consistently invest our money. But then I also find myself thinking, Well, you get one spin in life, and money at the end of the day is just a tool to enjoy that life. So boys, what would be your advice for someone like myself and your audience in similar positions? And what do you think a good and healthy balance looks like between living in the present and investing in the future? Cheers.
Love that question, Dustin. And we should just note that if people want to ask their questions, they can head to equitymates.com/contact, leave a voice note like Dustin did, and we'll play it on the show. But Bryce, this is a big question. I think this is a question that we both grapple with. We don't own nearly as many investment properties as Dustin does. So well done, Dustin, on
Short
building
answer. Dustin, you're doing well.
Yeah. But how do we strike that balance?
Well, I think firstly it is worth not acknowledging that you're doing very well, Dustin. On your way to a second investment property, a reasonable portfolio, and no debt other than the mortgage at 33.
Yeah.
But the way I think about it and have become comfortable with over the years is that it's not binary. It's not one or the other. You don't have to sacrifice the present to invest, and you don't have to. I used to be in a position where I thought I needed to squirrel away everything, and it came down to really trying to define what enough was, if that makes sense. Like, what is a good amount to be investing so that I'm comfortable that over a long period of time I'm going to have enough. And so that process just came through education, through obviously doing this show, through reading Morgan Housel's book, and realizing that you don't have to do a lot to have enough, if that makes sense. Like, you don't need to be investing 75% of your income to have a healthy investment portfolio.
Yeah. For me, this answer starts with goals, and it's we always speak about investing goals, and it's like, how much is enough to have a healthy portfolio, and like, what do you want your life to look like in time, and how much do you need to be investing today to get there. But I also think it's goals on the other side of the ledger, on the enjoying the present side of the ledger. The way I sort of think about it is like, when I want to spend a lot of money, or, you know, go on a trip or whatever it is, I'll just start allocating money to that out of my fortnightly pay, similar to the way that I allocate money to, you know, investment portfolio and stuff like that. And so it just becomes another thing that I'm working towards, because I don't think like enjoying the present necessarily means you got to spend a shitload of money. I think like if you get in that mindset, then you'll just start buying stuff that doesn't really add to your happiness or your enjoyment of life, just online shopping, buying junk. And so for me, it's like being really clear and intentional about like what actually brings you enjoyment in the present as well, and then like finding that balance based on the long-term goals and the short-term enjoyment. So it's just not spending frivolously because it's like YOLO.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's a word I haven't said in a while.
It is. Yeah, we're not big spenders though. I think is it helps. Like, we're not.
I mean, I am notoriously not a big spender.
You are.
To the point where like I was taking hand-me-down shoes from Kip and stuff.
You wore shoes with holes in them to work on rainy days.
But hey,
it does help.
Now I've got a share
portfolio. That's it. I think if you want a good insight into someone who's completely flipped their mindset on this, is our Aussie Firebug episode. You'll be able to search it in our feed. This was a guy who was so frivolous with his money and literally investing 75% of his income because he thought that is everything that he needed to do. Traveled, then realized that there's more to life than being frivolous and squirreling away all your money. Has now completely flipped his mindset. I would suggest going to listen to that.
Yeah. Nice one. All right. Well, hopefully that helped. But Dustin, you're in a great position, and keep doing what you're doing. This next question comes in from Ian.
Hi guys. I've recently started listening to your show and just wanted to say thank you. It's been a massive help as I begin my investing journey. I'm 20 years old and currently working full-time in an entry-level accounting role while I finish my university degree. Like many others in my position, I have a HECS debt of over 30K, and I'm trying to make smart financial decisions early on. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on a few things. Do you think it's worthwhile making voluntary payments on my HECS debt? If so, how much would you suggest? Should I consider making voluntary contributions to my superannuation at this stage of my life? How would you recommend I balance my income between investing, saving, and spending? Or just what would be the best plan of attack to start growing wealth now as a young person? Any guidance or general thoughts you could share with me and the many others in my position would be amazing. Thanks again for all the great content.
Love the question, Ian. I think, a couple of things to note. First of all, you're 20 years old, you're working full time, and you're thinking about investing. You're doing a lot right. So again, similar sentiment to what we said to Dustin earlier, like, well done. I also think it's worth just reminding everyone that we can speak generally here. We are licensed to give general advice, but we can't give specific financial advice. So, we'll speak generally about how to think about some of these things, adding extra to super, making voluntary HECS repayments. But obviously, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. So with that said, Bryce, how would you approach this question?
Well, I'll do it through the lens of how I thought about this. Firstly, I didn't enter the full-time workforce until I was actually 24 or 25, I think. So to be at an entry-level accounting role when you're 20, you have a lot of time ahead of you, Ian, and I would not be thinking about HECS personally at all. Yeah. I would be focused on...
HECS is like the third rail in Australian finance content because it gets people heated, which is interesting.
It does get people heated.
So let's wade into the fight.
Yeah, so it's not urgent for me at all. I would be completely focused, 20 years old, on increasing your income and working up that accounting role as fast as you can and just being really good at your job so that you can start earning more as fast as possible and figuring out how you can start saving as much of your income. Because I think, 30 grand at 20, if you can climb the ladder over the next sort of decade, you will pay that HECS off pretty quickly, depending how fast it's indexed. But I wouldn't be focusing on it. So
just to explain why we think it's not worth the extra repayments, HECS is the most inoffensive form of debt in Australia, in the sense that it's there's no interest. It is indexed, and obviously indexation really hurt over the past few years, and it got people heated because a 7% indexation rate felt like we were being charged interest,
which was then discounted by the government.
Yeah, but but CPI, as we spoke about earlier in this episode, is back to 2.1%. So the indexation isn't going to hurt as much as it had over the past few years. HECS is also a debt that's taken out of your pre-tax salary, but most importantly, it's only taken out when you're working and when you're earning over a certain amount.
Yeah.
And so if you stop working, it's not like you've got debt collectors calling you chasing repayments. On just a pure relative return basis, every dollar that you have, you can put it to work. And so if you think that, you can get 8% in the stock market, or you can save the 2% indexation on HECS, just rational financial maths says you should chase the higher return. So because it's an inoffensive form of debt, because if on a relative return basis, you should focus on building wealth and just let HECS slowly chip away over time.
The only point in my life, and I think maybe the same for you, Ren, was where it became an issue was going for a home loan.
Yeah.
Because at that point, they then look at your HECS debt and it becomes a multiplier on how much you can borrow, or they actually reduce your borrowing amount. But at that point in time, I think is the time to consider it.
Yeah. Ian, you're 20.
Yeah.
Property is probably a little way off. So again, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. But at this stage, we would say just let HECS tick away in the background and focus on building wealth outside and doing other things. So then the question became contributing more to super.
Well, the same thing applies. I think if you're 20 years old, you have so long to go before you can touch your superannuation. Yes, it's great. It's a great tax environment, but I personally would be looking at ways to build wealth outside of superannuation. Again, I'd be focusing on saving, earning as much as possible, improving my savings rate, paying myself, automating my investments, and then building wealth outside of that product.
Yeah. There's an argument that at 20, you could really just get your super juiced and going early and then let it compound over time and not have to make voluntary contributions as you get older and you've got more costs and more responsibilities, kids, mortgages, etc. There is that argument, and that's a completely fair argument. I would make the case that to keep you engaged in the process of investing throughout your 20s and your 30s, having a portfolio that you can see and touch and feel will make it a lot more real, will make compounding a lot more present in your life, and it will also give you flexibility as your life changes and your goals change. So I would say if you're 20 and you're thinking about it, investing outside of super probably makes more sense with the caveat that if you're the kind of person that will take that investment portfolio,
burn it all,
sell it all and go on a trip to Europe when you're 25 with your mates, then maybe super is a good protection for your worst impulses. But yeah, I would say build the investment portfolio, start seeing the power of compounding over time. And then that gives you flexibility in your life, but also flexibility to jump into other financial assets. You know, maybe in 10 years, you'll use it as a down payment for a house. So yeah, I think that flexibility is important.
All right, next question comes from Nick.
Hey Bryce and Ran, I've been following a DCA method where I'm fairly consistent with my investment intervals, but sometimes choosing to add in extra in some months where I might have saved some more money than usual, for example. I just wanted to know, is there a simple method or maybe what's the best method for understanding my overall performance?
Love it. Thanks for the question, Nick. I guess there's a couple of things here. Firstly, when you say performance, you probably want to consider what you're wanting to be tracking. So there's, I guess, total return, growth, dividends, total holdings, those sorts of things. But for me, Ren...
I think it's fair to say he wants to know all of that.
I know.
Total holdings, surely that's...
One ETF, track all your ETFs. For me, though, this is where the value of a platform really helps. And so I use ShareSite.
Okay.
So ShareSite for me is, Nick, if you use one of the online brokers, ShareSite can plug in to a lot of the online brokers these days, and every time you dollar cost average, the trade will be sent to ShareSite and will automatically update your holdings, and then you can generate as many reports as you like in ShareSite.
We have a code with them. If you the link will be in the show notes or the YouTube description, but you save 4 months when you purchase an annual premium plan. So if you want to check it out, you can go there. I think they also let you track like up to 10 holdings for free.
Yes.
So yeah, I think ShareSite is kind of the leader in Australia. There's a couple of other platforms, but I would also say the brokers themselves are getting better at giving you reporting. And so, you know, if you're using BetaShares Direct or Superhero or Stake or ComSec, like the reporting is getting better. Also have a look at your broker's reports because they probably have the information you need.
Yeah, they'll tell you total return on the homepage. All right, the next question is from Daniel.
How's it going? Daniel here, 24 years old, just started investing this year. Really appreciate the content you guys put out. Super digestible. My question is, as a 24-year-old hoping to retire somewhat earlier than 60 or 70, hearing a lot of chatter about investing in cash, bonds, equities later in life as you get closer to retirement. Just wanted to query, what does that look like, that transition? At what age? What does the transition look like? And what specific investments should we look to do as you get closer to that retirement age? Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, Daniel. Love the question. I got to say, loving how many young people are coming to the show at the moment. Early 20s, wanting to invest and retire early. Love it. I
love that Daniel's 24 years old and thinking about transitioning his portfolio to retirement.
Love that. So I think where I want to start with this, Ren, is a lot of people often have the ambition to retire early and use their portfolio to support that. And then they get focused on building the retirement portfolio with the assets now that actually should be used later.
Yeah.
So it's right now, Daniel, it's about focusing on growth. You want to be investing in assets that are going to build you the portfolio size that you need when you're 50 to actually generate income. So that's the first step. Make sure you're invested in growth assets. And then I think over time is where you start switching. I remember speaking to some advisors earlier on Ask an Advisor, and they sort of suggest a gradual approach from around 40 years old, depending on when you want to retire, but it's not like a sell everything, put it all in bonds.
Yeah. So there's a rule of 110 in financial planning, which is like a rough rule of thumb, but you take 110 and you minus your age, and that should be your allocation to growth assets, which is really stocks, and then the remaining should be in defensive assets, which traditionally is bonds. And so, you know, you're 34? So 110 less 34 is 76?
76, yeah.
And so, you know, that rule would say 76% equities, 24% bonds. I think that's a little conservative.
Definitely.
I actually think it should be like the rule of 140. So, you know, you only start reallocating from 100% growth when you turn 40.
Yeah.
Someone maybe would want to say 120, 130. But look, that's a rule of thumb that is kind of used to think about asset allocation. But yeah, it's a transition, and it's not a transition that you need to worry about anytime soon, Daniel. The real thing that financial planners are trying to avoid is, as you get closer to retirement, the market could fall, 30, 40, 50%, and you don't have the time left for the market to recover. But if you're young, you've got that time for the market to recover. If you look back in history, there's never been a dip that wasn't worth buying. Second time I've said that in this episode.
Yes.
So that's the main thing. That's the main thought process that goes on behind the asset allocation decisions.
Yeah.
And then it also just becomes shorter term goals as well. It might not just be retirement. You might want to free up some money to buy a house or something like that. And then it's you pull that into more defensive assets as you get closer to that purchase date.
Yeah.
The final thing I would say is just when people talk about having cash, they may also be talking about having an emergency fund, that pool of cash, generally 3 months of expenses that's not invested in the stock market, that's there if things go wrong, and it's generally in a high interest savings account. So that's something else to think about if you're thinking about setting yourself up for the long term.
Yeah.
But other than that, growth, baby.
Growth. Also, don't forget that when you hit, say, 45 and you're able to retire, you're probably still going to have 35 or 40 years of life left. So you're going to need that portfolio to keep growing. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we're going to close out by comparing stock ETFs that can go into a core portfolio and have a look at some of the small cap fund managers here in Australia. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Equity Mates. We're answering all of the community questions, well, as many as we can, Ren, that have come through. There are plenty still waiting to be answered, but thank you to everyone who has submitted. And this one comes from Jess.
Hey guys, love your work. You've really got me interested in investing, and I'm just setting up my core portfolio. I have a question about the ETF called AQLT, focuses on Australian quality companies. Just wondering if it would be okay to use that as a core portfolio as opposed to VAS or the A200. It does have a slightly higher management fee, but the results do seem to be a lot better than the other two mentioned. I know it's only got 40 companies as opposed to the 200 and 300, so just wanted to know what you thought about that. Thanks.
Love it. Thank you so much for the question, Jess. This is a good one. An ETF, friend, that is not often spoken about, but this is one of those company ETFs that gives somewhat of a tilt towards the ASX. So let's start with, firstly, what it is. It tracks the Selective Australia Quality Select Index, as Jess said, 40 to 50 high-quality Aussie companies. They're selected based on high return on equity, low financial leverage, and earnings stability. It does have a higher management fee than the index equivalents, 0.35%. But as Jess said, the performance since inception over the last sort of 3 years has been about 11.5% per annum. So if we compare AQLT to the index equivalents, we've got VAS, which is the Vanguard Australia Shares, or the Beta Shares A200. So A200 has 200, the top 200 companies, and VAS has 300. These are the broad-based market index funds that mirror the underlying index. VAS has a management fee of 0.1% and A200 is 0.04%, I think. And performance is roughly about 9% per annum or thereabouts. So the question, Ren, is could this AQLT be used as a core?
Well, just before then, I think we should say it's not the only ETF. So QUAL, Qual, is one that's often spoken about. And then there's an equivalent that's is slightly different but similar, Moat, which I actually own, which is focused on US stocks, but again, is looking for companies that have a wide moat. Arguably not the same as quality, but they end up being pretty similar. So yeah, the question is, can they be used as a core portfolio?
So I guess we could do pros and cons. The pros for these types of ETFs is that there should be some sort of expectation on outperformance. They're built for like a tilt towards quality or sort of some sort of factor. You're going to have a different set of companies in there and I guess a different sort of level of exposure, and they can complement other ETFs within your portfolio. But for me, the cons here are that they're not true market-based index tracking ETFs in that you're just going to have the mechanism of market cap weighted. You're less diversified. It's much more concentrated with 45 holdings versus 200 to 300 holdings. And you do have a higher fee. And so when I think about core portfolio, I want an index-based, low-cost, as low as possible ETF that is market cap weighted and gives me exposure to the underlying index. So the way I think about these is it's like you've got your A200, and then if you're particularly interested in the ASX and you want a bit of outperformance there, you might throw this on top.
Yeah. So look, I've got some thoughts. The first one is if you actually look under the hood of AQLT, it looks very similar to the top of the index.
A200.
So it's all the banks, or at least, all of the banks. BHP's in there. I'm only looking at the top 10. Woodside's in there. Wesfarmers is in there. Macquarie Bank's in there. CSL's in there. So very similar. Telstra is its second largest holding. It is obviously different because it screens out some of the lower quality companies and quality in inverted commas based on those financial metrics. But the top of the ETF looks very similar. I think what you need to understand when you're talking about quality ETFs is so there's this concept of factor investing. And so there are a number of factors that people will invest in. Quality is one, value is another one, momentum is another one. And that's where they try and group the market and group the companies into different factors, different groups, group them into different groups. And so you are making a bet on one particular factor doing well. And quality isn't a bad factor to bet on, but you just have to be conscious that you are sort of making a decision where you may not think you are making one.
Yeah.
And for me, at its core, the reason that index investing makes sense is because you buy everything with the understanding that you have no idea where the next leg of growth in a market is going to come from. That it's often companies that are unheralded or rising through the index and may not be captured by some of these factor ETFs, or they might sit in a momentum ETF, not a quality ETF. True index investing is company agnostic.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you deviate away from that, then you are making a decision.
Yeah.
And that's not bad. People have core portfolios that are active managers or that are 4 stocks or that are, a couple of these ETFs. And we don't begrudge you. You still have a pretty well diversified portfolio, 40 names. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but it's just
buyer beware. Know what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's not how we want to approach it, because it then undermines some of the fundamental logic of index investing. And we're pretty convinced that index investing is the right way to build a core.
Yeah. Well, speaking of active managers, Ren, we're going to close out with a question that has come from Mitchell.
G'day, Rice and Ren. You recently had James Abella from Fidelity's Global Future Leaders Fund on your show, and it got me thinking about options for a global small cap actively managed fund or ETF to complement my portfolio. Other than Fidelity's product, are there many actively managed funds targeting global small caps traded locally? Happy to consider any available abroad.
Nice. Thank you, Mitchell. A question that we get quite often here at Equity Mates is how to get exposure to small caps. So, look, without rattling off a heap of different names, there's a few ways to think about it. There's unlisted options, which is where you go directly to the manager and you can invest directly with them. They do often have a higher minimum, $10,000, $20,000, but some of the big names in the space, Hyperion, Perpetual, Spheria, Pengana, and Eli Griffiths are some of the small cap Australian focused.
But look, obviously most of us aren't like Bryce, who just has 10 or 20 grand sitting around ready to deploy. So for the rest of us, we need to look at listed options. So here's a few names, a few tickers that you can look at. So there's a couple that are more sort of index based, and full disclosure, Bryce and I don't love the small cap index.
Yeah.
We think emerging markets and small caps are two places where active management makes sense.
Yeah.
But some names to be aware of: the Vanguard Australian Small Companies ETF, VSO, iShares ASX Small Ordinaries ETF, SMLL, two names to be aware of. Then you've got some factor ETFs. So you've got QSML, which is VanEck International Small Companies Quality
popular
ETF.
with the Equity Mates community.
And then the iShares S&P Small Cap 600 Value ETF, another factor one. Obviously, this one focused on the US. That's IJS. So there's index options, there's factor options, but then there's some active options as well.
Yeah, the active options, there are some listed investment companies that specialize or are investing in small caps. So you've got the Wilson Asset Management Microcap Listed Investment Company, ticker WMI. Spheria's Emerging Companies, the ticker is SEC. And then QV Equities, the ticker is QVE. So those are listed investment companies. So there are a few options available.
So this has been a long run up, but basically we've covered off all the ways of investing in small caps that we don't love. The small cap index, we don't love. The small cap factors, they're better, but again, not sure it's optimal. Listed investment companies, you can listen to Bryce rant about listed investment companies, and they're trading at a discount to net asset value some other time. And that finally gets us to active ETFs that invest in small caps. There are only 2 listed in the ASX at the moment. One that was mentioned in the question, the Fidelity Global Future Leaders active ETF. The ticker is FCAP. And then there's also the Dimensional Global Small Companies active ETF. The ticker is DGSM. So they're the 2 at the moment that are active ETFs investing in small caps. I wouldn't be surprised if more come to market, in the coming years. So definitely one to keep an eye out for, because we certainly get a lot of questions around small caps and how people can access them if they don't have a $50,000 pool of cash like Bryce ready to deploy.
That's it. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted their questions. We have a lot to get through. Happy end of financial year. I think we're in a new financial year tomorrow, but we're going to end it there. As always, Ren, it's been great to chat stocks, and we will pick it up next episode.
Sounds good.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.